A student in London, the ledgers kept at Lincoln's Inn in the 1890s were given for salvage during the 1939–45 war. The contemporary shipping lists no longer exist, and Jinnah's English bankers lost their records during a bombing raid. There seems to be no way of finding out when or how he came to England, except that the year was 1892. Only his reader's ticket for the British Museum has been saved, and it gives his London address as 35 Russell Road, Kensington. The house, which still stands, is one of a modest row that face the immense glass arch of Olympia. The view from the windows is over a busy suburban railway line. Jinnah once said of his arrival in England, "I found a strange country and unfamiliar surroundings. I did not know a soul, and the fogs and winter in London upset me a great drat, but I soon settled down and was quite happy." Jinnah's achievement as a student was remarkable. He passed his examinations in 2 years. If the 1876 birth date is to be believed, the date also given in the records of the Law Society, he was not yet 18, but he had to remain in England 2 more years to complete the formalities required by Lincoln's Inn. Dr. Ashraf recalls Jinnah telling him that he was the youngest Indian student ever to be called to the bar. But there are no details of the hours of diligent study that brought about this feat of scholarship, of the habits formed beside an oil lamp in the house in Newnham Road, and projected to the reading rooms of the law libraries and the British Museum. Mrs. Naidu wrote of Jinnah some years later, "It seems a pity that so fine an intelligence should have denied itself the hallmark of a university education." Jinnah apparently withstood the temptations of literature and art and even of history. His mind seldom doted on the past, and it would seem that his habits in London were narrowed down, that his way was from lectures in Lincoln's Inn to debates in the House of Commons, without any pausing in the National Gallery on the way. He was to do 2 things brilliantly in his life. He was to become a great advocate, and he was to create a nation. From the beginning, he did not dissipate his energies with hobbies nor his strength with dalliance. His chief passions were in his mind. In an address to the Karachi Bar Association in 1947, Jinnah recalled, "I joined Lincoln's Inn because there, on the main entrance, the name of the Prophet was included in the list of the great lawgivers of the world." He spoke of Muhammad as a great statesman and a great sovereign. His appreciation of the Prophet was realistic. Perhaps his political conscience as a Muslim had already begun to stir while he was in England. Jinnah told Dr. Ashraf that during the last 2 years in London, his time was utilized for further independent studies for the political career he already had in mind. Jinnah also said, "Fortune smiled on me, and I happened to meet several important English liberals with whose help I came to understand the doctrine of liberalism. The liberalism of Lord Morley was then in full sway. I grasped that liberalism, which became part of my life and thrilled me very much." This awakening in politics coincided with significant personal changes. Up to April 1894, Muhammad Ali Jinnah had used his boyhood name, Jinnah Bhai being a suffix used in the Gujarati language, which was his mother tongue. On April 14, 1894, he adopted the English fashion in names and became Mr. Jinnah, the form he used for the rest of his life. He had also abandoned his funny, long yellow coat and adopted English clothes, and perhaps encouraged by the sight of Mr. Joseph Chamberlain in the house, he had bought his first monocle. It must have been an important moment in the development of his courage and his personality when he went to an optician's shop in London and bought the first of the many monocles which he wore during the next 50 years, even at the end when he was being carried into his capital on a stretcher, a dying warrior holding the circle of glass between his almost transparent fingers. Jinnah had said that the liberalism of Lord Morley thrilled him very much. The thrill must have been intensified on June 21, 1892, when he read of the royal assent to the amendment to the Indian Councils Act, empowering the viceroy to increase the numbers in the legislative and provincial councils, an amendment that gave the people of India, for the first time, a potential voice in the government of their country. The beginning of Jinnah's partiality for liberalism was well timed. At the end of May 1892, Mr. Gladstone spoke with a vigour and animation most remarkable in a man of 82. He was rewarded in the following August, when the Liberals came into power after 6 years of Tory rule under Lord Salisbury. The early 1890s offered refreshing opportunities for any young novice in politics, newly arrived from India, anxious to learn, and naturally in love with agitation and reform. In 1893, when Jinnah must have recovered from his loneliness and settled down, he was able to listen to some of the lively debates over Mr. Gladstone's Irish Home Rule Bill. He was able also to study English reactions to affairs in India and Egypt, to watch the growing power of Labour and to develop his sympathy with the political emancipation of women, a reform that became a fixed part of his political creed when he returned to India. There was another stirring innovation nearer his own heart. Jinnah arrived in London in time to watch, perhaps to help, the election of the first Indian, Dadabhai Naoroji, to the British Parliament as member for Central Finsbury. Dadabhai Naoroji was a Parsi, aged 67 at the time of his return. For many years he had been a businessman in London. Photographs of him in later life reveal some of the reasons why he came to be known as the Grand Old Man of India. His humorous old eyes, long white beard, and relaxed hands proclaim the teacher about whom young Indians gathered to learn, rather than the furious agitator in love with change for its own sake. When Dadabhai Naoroji announced his intention to stand as Liberal candidate for Central Finsbury, Lord Salisbury committed the clumsy folly in a speech at Edinburgh of saying, "I doubt if we have yet got to the point of view where a British constituency would elect a black man." The Scottish electors shouted, "Shame!" and the indignation spread south, as far as Windsor, where Queen Victoria, attended by Indian servants and engrossed in her study of Hindustani, was much displeased. The unhappy insult, addedly unfortunate because Dadabhai Naoroji had a paler skin than Lord Salisbury, soon made the Parsi Liberal into a hero. The chapters in his biography describing the controversy awakened by the election in Finsbury make an exciting story. Women's suffrage was one of his aims, and he was therefore overwhelmed by women helpers. Among the letters sent to him was one from Florence Nightingale. "I rejoice beyond measure," she wrote, "that you are now the only Liberal candidate for Central Finsbury." Dadabhai Naoroji was elected with a majority of 3, and the quick-tongued Cockneys who had voted for him turned his difficult name into Mr. Narrow Majority. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was caught up in the excitement of the Finsbury election, and he prospered under the influence of Dadabhai Naoroji, whom he was to serve as secretary 14 years later. It is reasonable to suppose that Jinnah learned much from Naoroji's speeches, that he absorbed some ideas from the grand old man. The nature and quality of these ideas are revealed in the first speech which Dadabhai Naoroji made in the House of Commons on August 9, 1892, during the no-confidence debate following the speech from the throne. He said, "My election for an English constituency is a unique event. For the first time, during more than a century of settled British rule, an Indian is admitted into this House as a member for an English constituency. I desire to say a few words in analysis of this great and wonderful phenomenon. The spirit of British rule, the instinct of British justice and generosity, from the very commencement, when Parliament seriously took the matter of Indian policy into its hands about the beginning of this century, decided that India was to be governed on the lines of British freedom and justice. Steps were taken, without any hesitation, to introduce Western education, civilization, and political institutions in that country. And the result was that, aired by a noble and grand language, in which the youth of that country began to be educated, a great movement of political life, I may say new life, was infused into a land which had been decaying for centuries. The British rulers of the country endowed it with all their own most important privileges. A few days ago, sir, you demanded from the throne Thai privileges which belong to the people, including freedom of speech for which they have fought and shed their blood. That freedom of speech you have given to us, and it enables Indians to stand before you and represent in clear and open language any desire they have felt. By conferring those privileges, you have prepared for this final result of an Indian standing before you in this house, becoming a member of the great imperial parliament of the British Empire, and being able to express his views openly and fearlessly before you. Mr. Gladstone, Mr. Balfour, Mr. T.P. O'Connor, and the other speakers during the debate might have wondered where Dadabhai Naoroji's passions would lead him next. He was expected, as ardent Gladstonian, to support his leader in the debate, but, as the Times reporter wrote, he eye-dilated with radiant naivete on the splendour of his victory in central Finsbury, and concluded without saying one word on the matter in hand. Dadabhai Naoroji continued, "The glory and credit of this great event, by which India is thrilled from one end to the other, of the new life, the joy, the ecstasy of India at the present moment, is all your own. It is the spirit of British institutions and the love of justice and freedom in British instincts which has produced this extraordinary result. And I stand here in the name of India to thank the British people that they have made it at all possible for an Indian to occupy this position and to speak freely in the English language of any grievance which India may be suffering under, with the conviction that, though he stand alone with only one vote, whenever he is able to bring forward any aspiration and is supported by just and proper reasons, he will find a large number of other members from both sides of the House ready to support him and give him the justice he asks. This is the conviction which permeates the whole thinking and educated classes of India." Muhammad Ali Jinnah heard this speech from the visitors' gallery of the House of Commons, and he no doubt absorbed its lessons. These fragments of fact about Jinnah do not yet make him real. He is only half clear, as in a first pencil sketch for a portrait, without colour, depth, or humour. There are but 2 stories of these student days that show him as a human being away from his reading, lamp and the gallery of the House of Commons. Many years later, when Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru were in prison in India, a friend said to Jinnah, "All the leaders have been arrested at some time or other except you." Jinnah answered, "Oh, I also have had my friction with the police. It was on Oxford and Cambridge boat race night when I was a student in London. I was with 2 friends and we were caught up with a crowd of undergraduates. We found a handcart in a side street, so we pushed each other up and down the roadway until we were arrested and taken off to the police station. But I am afraid we were not imprisoned, we were let off with a caution." Also, there was a spell away from his studies when he toured England with a Shakespearean company. In 1946, Jinnah recalled this incongruous adventure to Mr. Nasim Ahmed. He described his experiences as a prompter and the occasion when he played Romeo. No more is known, although there is a legend, unproven, that for a time he was with Miss Horniman's famous repertory company. There is little trace of influence on his vocabulary or in his speeches from this nodding acquaintance with Shakespeare. There was but one episode, in the far future, when Gandhi asked Jinnah how he wished to be addressed. Jinnah answered, "I thank you for your anxiety to respect my wishes in the matter of the prefix you should use with my name. What is a prefix, after all? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Jinnah was never to become excited by the charm of words. His prose, written or spoken, was bald and factual. Many years later, when he was drafting a statement with the help of Liaquat Ali Khan and one of his secretaries, he became impatient with their search after fine sentences and said, "I don't care for beautiful language. I only wish to see my idea come through."